The rumor didn't begin as a headline, but as a question whispered too often to ignore. Not about whether Sam Heughan and Caitriona Balfe were close, but whether something far more permanent had already happened out of sight. When the word married entered the conversation, it didn't sound like fantasy anymore. It sounded like a possibility people were suddenly willing to take seriously. What made the allegation explosive was not a single piece of proof, but a convergence of details that had lingered for years. Long gaps where both disappeared from public view at the same time. Personal schedules that aligned too neatly to be coincidence. And a pattern of silence that felt less like avoidance and more like protection. For over a decade, Sam and Caitriona maintained a unified front. Every interview followed the same script: close friends, deep respect, nothing more. They corrected nothing directly, but they never confirmed anything either. That consistency, once reassuring, now felt calculated under a harsher lens. Industry insiders began pointing out how unusual that level of coordination really was. Actors drift, friendships evolve, answers change over time. Yet theirs never did. According to one anonymous source, that kind of discipline is rarely accidental and often reflects an agreement larger than the public ever sees. The idea of a secret wedding didn't come with photos or leaked invitations. It came with something quieter and more unsettling. Reports of a small, private ceremony attended by no recognizable names. No paparazzi, no social media traces, and no celebratory aftermath visible to the public eye. Those details alone would not have survived scrutiny. What pushed the story further were secondary hints that followed. Subtle changes in how Sam spoke about home. Caitriona's careful phrasing when discussing her future. Language that implied stability rather than possibility. Behind the scenes, people claimed to have been asked to sign stricter confidentiality agreements. Not unusual in entertainment, but the timing raised eyebrows. According to multiple accounts, this wasn't about a project or a role. It was about keeping something personal contained long after it had already happened. As the story gained momentum, fans revisited old footage with fresh suspicion. Moments once dismissed as playful suddenly felt intimate. Glances lingered longer, pauses felt heavier, and jokes carried undertones that hadn't registered before. Retrospective analysis became fuel for belief. The phrase, "truth exposed," began circulating not because facts were confirmed, but because the silence cracked. No immediate denial came. No light-hearted dismissal followed. For the first time, the familiar strategy of deflection was absent, replaced by something that felt like waiting. That waiting was interpreted in different ways. Some saw it as proof that there was nothing to deny. Others argued it was a refusal to legitimize a rumor spiraling out of control. But even skeptics admitted that the lack of response was unusual given the scale of the claim. What complicated matters further was the emotional investment of the fandom. For years, many had built narratives around Sam and Caitriona's connection, only to be told those narratives were imagined. The idea that a marriage might have existed all along reframed that history in an uncomfortable way. If the allegations were true, it would mean the public had been interacting with a carefully managed illusion. If they were false, it would still raise questions about why such a rumor could feel so believable. Either way, the story was no longer about romance alone. It was about trust, perception, and the cost of secrecy. As the whispers grew louder, one reality became clear. This wasn't just another piece of celebrity gossip destined to fade. It struck at the core of a relationship fans thought they understood. And once that doubt took hold, there was no easy way to put it back where it came from. The scandal, real or imagined, had already done its work. It forced a reckoning with the past, and it demanded answers the public had never. As the rumor expanded, attention shifted from whether the marriage had happened to why it would have been hidden so completely. Insiders suggested that secrecy was not about romance, but survival. A public relationship between the two leads of a global phenomenon would have altered contracts, marketing strategies, and the fragile balance that kept fantasy and reality separate. In that context, silence was not deception, but strategy. Those who claimed knowledge of the situation described a long-standing agreement to keep personal milestones out of the public eye. Not just dating, but anything that could collapse the carefully maintained distance between the actors and the characters audiences adored. A wedding, if it occurred, would have been treated as a liability rather than a celebration. Privacy became policy. The idea that others had to stay quiet added another layer to the scandal. Crew members, close friends, and professional associates were said to be aware of boundaries they could never cross. Not because they were ordered to lie, but because acknowledging the truth would have created consequences for everyone involved. Knowing without speaking became the norm. As fans debated ethics, the conversation grew more divided. One side argued that no one is owed access to another person's marriage, public figure or not. The other felt manipulated, pointing to years of synchronized denials that now seemed misleading. The tension was not about love, but about whether honesty had been deliberately postponed. Media scrutiny intensified the discomfort. Journalists re-examined old interviews, highlighting phrases that now sounded evasive rather than neutral. Statements once praised for professionalism were reframed as calculated ambiguity. The narrative shifted from private individuals to managed perception. What complicated the backlash was the absence of definitive proof. No documents were produced publicly, no photos surfaced to close the case. Instead, the story lived in accumulation, patterns, timing, and consistency that felt persuasive without being conclusive. That gray area is where scandal thrives. Supporters of Sam and Caitriona emphasized intent over optics. They argued that protecting a relationship from exploitation was reasonable, even admirable. Fame, they said, distorts intimacy, and choosing secrecy can be an act of care rather than manipulation. In that framing, the scandal said more about public expectation than private action. Critics were unconvinced. They pointed out that repeated denials, even carefully worded ones, shaped fan perception in deliberate ways. If the truth had been known internally, they argued, then silence crossed into misdirection. The question was no longer whether a marriage occurred, but how truth should be handled when profit and privacy collide. As debates raged, neither Sam nor Caitriona offered clarification. That choice, intentional or not, allowed the story to evolve on its own. Silence became both shield and accelerant, protecting them while fueling speculation. Each day without comment hardened opinions rather than softening them. What became clear was that the alleged marriage was only part of the story. The real exposure lay in how modern celebrity operates, how narratives are curated, how boundaries are enforced, and how audiences participate in sustaining illusions. Whether the wedding was real mattered less than what the belief revealed. In the end, massive scandal described the reaction more than the act. A collision between private choice and public investment, intensified by years of unanswered questions. The truth, whatever it is, may never be fully verified in public terms. But the impact is undeniable. Trust was tested, assumptions were shaken, and a relationship once discussed only in whispers became a mirror for larger anxieties about access and control. If secrecy was meant to protect something meaningful, it also ensured that exposure, real or perceived, would be just as powerful. And once that door opened, it could not be quietly closed again.